Welcome to One Man's Tracks, the second-hand music channel. This week I had yet another encounter with a group of alien artists, this time with a cheesy pop-punk band called Supernova. There actually isn't a ton about this group online, but I did happen to find some lore, a little bit of backstory about how they came to come to Earth and why they started a rock band in the first place. When a nearby star went supernova, a group of Cynotians, Art, Hank, Dave, and Joe in his hibernation phase were forced to flee their home planet of Cynot 3. They would take their rock and roll powered starship tour bus and crash land it in Costa Mesa, California in 1989. Realizing they'd landed on a planet rich in the most valuable resource from their home planet, tinfoil, they chose to find a way to take over this planet and gather as much of that resource as possible, forming a rock band called Supernova to take over the planet just like that supernova took over their home world. They'd released a few singles and an EP in the early 90s, getting their first break when their song Chewbacca was featured on the Clerks soundtrack in 1994. Later that same year, Hank, Hayden Theus would leave the group and end up joining similarly futuristic robotic groups like Man or Astroman, as well as Servotron under the names Dexter X and 00ZX1 respectively. Taking Jody Lawrence out of hibernation to become Supernova's next guitarist, they'd get started recording their debut album, and at the same time they'd start putting together this goofy children's show pilot with the band being the stars of the show and their music being featured in it. They'd teach you about the Heimlich maneuver and taking your vitamins. It might not have gotten picked up by any network, but they still sold it at their shows, and there's a version online that I've got linked down in the description with Spanish subtitles there. It's a blast. It's an excellent introduction to the band, their antics, and their tunes that show up on this. This is the band's first full-length album, released in October of 1995 through Amphetamine Reptile Records, produced by Tim Mack. This is Supernova's Ages 3 and Up. Like its title suggests, this music is quick and geared towards a broad audience. This is probably leaning towards the younger end of that spectrum, but hey, I'm not saying that this preteen pop-punk isn't something that everybody can't enjoy. If you're someone who appreciates a level of campiness, quirkiness, then I think you'll find that these extraterrestrial stooges are endearing, energizing, and even elevating. Behind the characters is this new wave influenced Cynotian pop punk that is surprisingly groovy despite the intentionally jangly, punky qualities it has. The songs, the lyrics are quite yelped and delivered in a repetitive, sometimes meaningless fashion that still somehow finds a way to sneak their way into your brain, cozy up in a little neural nook, and then spring out when you encounter one of this album's silly subjects in your day-to-day life. And that's particularly the case with these first couple of songs. You got Vitamins and Oreo. With a couple of catchy cuts right out the gate, they show off their ability to transform something mundane like taking your vitamins or eating an Oreo into a thrilling little ride. Vitamins having a country punk aesthetic and expressing the importance of everybody taking their vitamins, and then Oreo jumping excitedly onto the other end of the health spectrum to celebrate this delicious sugary treat. Oreo! Where's your milk, man? There's then the first of a few rather nonsensical songs that show up on this album. This one's called Arigato. It's a guy that has a name drawn out of an anglicized version of the Japanese word arigato. It's this 2-minute fever dream of a punk track. It has a couple little oriental music cliches thrown in there. It packs a lot into its short little runtime, and I don't really know how to feel about it. Next is this record's most commercial cut called Up and Down, delivering a playful skate punk tonality and just good vibes with a fun guitar solo in it. It leads us into another great song called Mechanical. It's this methodical Tin Man-esque tune that plods along with a weighted, jangly instrumental breaking up its real pleasant new wave melody, and then it kicks it into double time, pushing the machine close to its breaking point. Gunfighter and Wabbit are both these up-tempo, sort of catchy nothing tunes that are kind of gross and goofy respectively, and then that light-hearted tone shifts temporarily for the track Invasion that brings in these sirens and urgent bass line and lyrics that seems to allude at the fact that Supernova eats people. I guess just moving on to the next ones, we get a pair of groovy punk songs that are half comprehensible with Best Coat and Drool. They're decent musical amalgamations of what's come up on this first half of the album here. They're simple call and response punk songs that move really well. They're fun while they're on, but kind of forgotten afterwards. Now, I'm not going to go out and say the flow on this album is perfect. It is a punk record after all, but I am still consistently impressed by the level of engagement it provides over its near 40-minute runtime. That said, there is this 11-second breakup. The song called Hippie is the only thing on this album that really isn't appropriate for someone aged 4 years old. I guess it is pretty punk rock to give a big F you in the middle of your album, but having some guy yelling at a hippie using colorful language to threaten to beat him up isn't something that's appropriate, and it's unfortunate because I feel like the whole rest of this album is some of the most fun a really young punk listener could have before they're ready for something a little more hardcore. It's even a little hard to skip because it's jammed right in the center of this fast-flowing project, and even though it's super brief and maybe even directed at the band themselves, it isn't the worst thing. It just disrupts the project and goes against the name of the album, and so I don't really totally understand why it's there at all. Either way, let's just move on forward. Let's get Stuck at Sea for a couple of tracks, the first of which being Sea Stunt that cruises in on this jazzy verse that is then abruptly interrupted by some of that usual campy punk chorus that then leads you into the next seafaring tale, a little SOS getting sent out on a catchy Cali rock song called Daredevil. It is a good tune, but it is probably the only instance on the whole project where a song overstays its welcome, and the song is only about 3 minutes long. Filling out the back half of this record, you get a few quick silly songs that remind me a lot of Nardwar's band, The Evaporators. There's Mentos, it's just this play on words, it's pretty goofy, and then there's this scot-up, self-referential song called Boo, and then a more unhinged track called Our Way. A favorite of mine sneaks into the end here. It's the joyful, headsy Electric Man with its excellent instrumental, interesting time signature, along with this nice 3-part harmony for the rockin' chorus. I'm into this one. Super Song feels like the big power-up moment before the finale where we're finally introduced to the band members. We learn that Supernova is the best band around and it's all about Dave. Then they close it out with NASA samples drifting over top of the pop punk opera ambiance that emits out of Close Encounters. I'm so glad that this Supernova drifted into the one-man track's airspace and that these antennas were tuned to the correct frequency in order to intercept this UFO and turn it into a slightly more identified spinning disc. As mindless as Supernova's brand of goofy, entertaining, and competent bubblegum punk can be, it still did connect with an audience, and they were part of the Warped Tour in '95, that original Warped Tour, and then reprised in '99 following the release of their second album, Rocks, in '98. They unfortunately didn't quite reach that level of worldwide tinfoil supremacy they had hoped for, with their final full-length release being a compilation in 2001 called Pop as a Weapon, with recordings from when Hank was still a member of the group. They gained a small swell of popularity in '05 touring with the Aquabats, and '07 once they appeared on Yo Gabba Gabba playing Up and Down. They got to appear in a few more festivals, coming back and doing the Warped Tour for the third time in 2007, even releasing a single that year that apparently they only pressed 200 copies of and I can't find online, so it's out there somewhere. It was also around this time that a CBS show called Rockstar was putting together a band, and they wanted to call it Supernova as well, and so the real Supernova had to send in a lawsuit and make them change their name, which they just changed to Rockstar Supernova. Not a big shift, but what a silly little extra hubbub over something that they already knew was around. They had planned to make another album and even had written a few songs, but Jody left the group in 2008 and was replaced by Corey Pollock for just a couple of years before the band kind of broke up for a little bit. They reunited with Jody for a few shows in 2015 and 2016, but to my knowledge, they haven't played any since then. Art Mitchell, Dave Collins, and Big Drill Cars Frank Daly started a group called the Unhushables, and they released their debut album, 1 in a Million, in 2018. I don't think it's quite as peculiar as their stuff with Supernova, but if you like Art's bass playing, Dave's drumming, they've still got that going on. Let me know your thoughts on this and Supernova down in the comments. You can listen to it with the link in the description along with everything else I talked about. Maybe check out that little kids TV show pilot they put together. I think it's a blast. Either way, like and subscribe if you haven't already, and check out another video I made. There's one about the evaporators and just one YouTube thinks you'll like. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Take good care. Don't forget to take your vitamins. I'm gonna take my vitamins! Oreo!